Well, welcome everyone to this discussion on timelines. I'm so excited that you're here. This is Stephanie, and I'm going to let her do a quick introduction about who she is in a little bit. And we thought it's very important. Both of us work in the Akashic Records quite frequently, and timelines always are one of the major things that we look at, whether timelines coming in from the past that are influencing people or timelines of the future that we're trying to kind of like align with as well. So Stephanie, if you could please do just a quick introduction on who you are before we jump into the subject, that would be amazing.
Yeah, okay. I'm Stephanie, and I've been a seeker for at least 25 years now. I've facilitated a variety of modalities and workshops. I hold myself as a multidimensional being, an energy guide, all kinds of other titles. But right now I have the privilege of teaching for Natasha in the Academy, the introduction to the Akashic Records, as well as the dimensional healing course. So it's a lot of fun. And as we do our check-ins and our work together, we have some amazing conversations. So when Natasha asked if I'd like to join into this conversation this evening, I jumped right at it. So yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and for those of you that don't know me, I'm Natasha Mott, founder of Raising the Vibes Academy of Consciousness, and we tend to look at all things kind of metaphysical, all things spiritual. And this conversation has come at quite a timely time, because I was just reading an article about the Schumann resonance and how we've gone into kind of like a few days of kind of like darkness in a sense, and how does that influence timelines? And I think a great place to start is by defining a timeline. Stephanie, how do you tend to see timelines?
So the way that I guess I grew up thinking of timelines was very much 3D, and it's in, if you really look at it, how we define it in our dimensional aspects in our introduction to the Akashic Records course, it happens in the 2D universe whenever there's that split and we can perceive other, but we really do experience it in this 3D reality that we've all been inhabiting. And where it now starts to shift is when we begin to experience time differently in the 4D. And then when we're going to, in the 5D, be able to manipulate what our past perception of time is. So for me, I used to have a very linear definition of time that we all grew up with, that we were all raised with. But now, for the most part, other than whenever I'm, involved in a to-do list where something is you have to be there by a certain time, I find I'm much more in flow and much more open to a non-linear time. I don't know if that's just confused everything or made it really simple.
Absolutely. Well, I totally understand. For me, it was as well kind of like looking at timelines from a very linear perspective, as in kind of like, we need to get from A to B, I need to be that certain time. But what started happening for me is working within the Akashic, I started seeing how if time doesn't exist, it means it's all happening at the same time, right? So when we start looking at past lives, future lives, it's all happening right now. And the way that I like to describe that as if, for example, if we looked at, say, took Netflix as an example, and you take one actress, she's been in many movies, or one actor has been in many movies, and whatever we choose to look at, you can either fast forward the movie or rewind it. And even if it's a series, so if you even took like Grey's Anatomy for one, kind of a thing, you could play the first season or the last season, it doesn't matter. They all exist at the same time, which they're all present somewhere on Netflix, but we can play them at different times. So it's actually, in a way, it was a way of explaining timelines and how they're all happening at the same time. And I started noticing in the Akashic Records that when I was jumping into people's records, that there would be a past life that would be in resonance with the lifetime that they were having now. So the people in their lives, how they were in different capacities, were more or less the same people or contracts within this lifetime in a different capacity, but acting out the same behavioral patterns that were coming in. So it was a chance to really shift that, which was quite interesting. And then when I started looking at future timelines, so kind of like a linear, because timelines for me happened, I tend to kind of like pin them down to different choices that we make, which creates a thread to that timeline. That's how I tend to see them in the Akashic Records. So it's almost kind of like when we're looking at future decisions based on the linear time that we perceive to this moment, what are the choices that are available? And it will bring up the different timeline or a different reality or the different direction we choose to go in, which is so interesting. So when there's choices, I can look into every thread of timeline to see where that is. But that really is just shifting a perception, which is very, very interesting. Which then brings us to looking at the collapse of timelines at the moment with what's happening with the collective consciousness, which is so interesting because as we shift our perception, as we look to what we want to achieve and create, those timelines that were there before seem to start to kind of like merge is the way I've seen it. How have you seen it? How have you experienced that?
Well, I just want to how you just described the timelines and everything. It is for me, and it really came about through my coaching practice, that it is a choice point, and breath to breath we have a choice point and we have infinite possibilities, but we've forgotten that we can choose to create whatever we want. And we're so stuck in our habituation that we kind of we're just cruising down the highway on the same old timeline, and we don't realize that we can switch lanes at any point. And all it takes is one active embodied choice, not just narrating it with our thoughts, but actively choosing to make a change. We change timelines already. And I know, one of some of the artwork that I love is Alex Gray. When you see, those tendrils of energy that make up the individual, but also, the cosmos. And in that is where I see those threads to the ancestral lines, to past lives, to whatever collectives I am tethered to in this reality and in other places, spaces, dimensions, right? Yeah, and it's really remembering that all time is now. I think what's happening right now is there's so much distraction going on, and it's very much that divine masculine energy. It's very thought centered, and it's very much about control and manipulation. And so the way I'm seeing everything right now is this is just a breath. It's just on a larger scale. So, and anybody who's done the foundation course with me, it's invite and allow. It's like I invite in the essence of who I am. I am this point of energy in this moment in time. And then I'm willing to collapse on the exhale. And so, if you look at it in terms of, we all, from an individual perspective, from a family perspective, any communities that we're part of are, then just go bigger, to province, country, whatever, global, to, there are other realms, other aspects that we belong to as well. And so what's happening all at once as we're spiraling through the universe, right? And this could just be a really natural point where we're on that exhale. And if I know you've heard me reference Irving Laszlo a lot, but whenever he in his book The Chaos Point, and it's something the world at the crossroads, we were just finishing like a 5,000 year masculine energy cycle. And before that, it was 50,000 years of the divine feminine. So, you know, whenever you read things like that, there are these larger cycles of energy that we're not aware of, but we're just on the cusp. And so for me, you know, thinking about this conversation tonight, it's almost like there's an elastic and the tension is building, 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 building. And I think that's what we're all really feeling right now. And it's trying to find that balance between our intellect, which is strongly conditioned to stay in our lane and to just keep on driving, to where we need to make radical changes, right? If we want things to shift, we have to be willing to step up and make a radical change. And what does that look like? You know, this has been an opportunity that we've collectively created to, you know, take that inhalation, exhale, and then what do we choose for the next inhalation of our creation, our collective creation? So yeah, I think I went off on a tangent, but that's okay.
That's okay. No, I totally agree with you. And looking back at the kind of like the timelines are based on our decisions, we are constantly shifting timelines, constantly. And when we shift timelines, we shift different realities, absolutely. But the thing is, we don't notice it because we're making small decisions constantly. So it's not enough of a big shift. But you have those people that are like, or get to a stage where shifting jobs, shifting homes, shifting partners, like shifting completely, their life tends to swing into a different reality quite a lot. And it's like you say, as a collective, we've asked to go through this shift in timeline because as a collective, I feel that we were very stagnant in where we were. There was no expansion. There was just kind of like work, home, watch TV, sleep, wake up, work, home. It was kind of like becoming, and we weren't, I'm talking in general, obviously, where there wasn't enough for humanity as a species to expand. And that's exactly what it is. I think as a collective, we've chosen to move through this so that the structures of society, which is the financial, the education, the health, all of that needed to be looked at so that we could all, as you were saying, shift as a society to something that works, because what worked before 100 years ago is not working anymore as we shift our consciousness. And I think the more we shift our consciousness on a collective, the more on a collective timeline reality we shift, which brings in the interesting aspect of that theory of the 3D world and the 5D world really kind of like shifting and expanding. And it's quite interesting for us as light workers supporting the 3D world, hoping for that awakening so that we can shift our reality. And the amazing thing that I discovered the other day is two people can be standing right next to each other and living different timelines and different realities based on their perceptions and their outlook towards life.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's exactly it. It is perceptual, right? And so our perception is really influenced by the frequency that we inhabit, right? So now is the time that's really important for us to be doing all of our self-care practices, to, you know, be engaging in our energy modalities and meditation, and, you know, just being fully present and actively choosing from a place of being awake and aware and engaged. You know, Eckhart Tolle talks about the fullness of life, and it's not the end point. It's being present in that moment and experiencing life fully. So what can we create if we're fully engaged? That's what I always get curious about, because right now, a lot of what I see is people are very much in their enculturation, and it's almost like this form of amnesia that they don't realize that their birthright is infinite possibility here. And it's just like, and even with everything I know, I have a hard time reminding myself of that. And that's where the records and the work that we do come in really it's very elegant because I know for myself, there's narratives around scarcity and uncertainty or fear. And yeah, some of them are mine and some of them are stuff that I've just carried and embodied from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. And others are just, the gift of family and the baggage that they leave you with. So yeah, so it's the work that we can do there. And it's not, what I love about the records is you don't have to go in and analyze anything. It's just you pop in, you shift that energy and you come out. But what I think sometimes gets lost in translation is that you then have to actively embody a change. You have to reflect an actual physical, tangible change in this perspective, in this moment, in this breath, or those tethers just reattach again, right? It's just, you have to be willing to make the shift. And that's something that I'm actively working with myself, but it's hard sometimes, right? It's hard.
It is. And very recently, I ended up going to the UK with my mom and my children. And I did that. And I know on a subconscious level, I did it to prove to myself that I choose my reality, right? Because I ended up going out there with spending 6 weeks out there in a time where they were like, no, you have to, well, now it's changed where you have to be vaccinated. But back then it was that was the story as well. And I was like, well, let me see if I can change this reality. And it shifted so much that I ended up kind of like, it went really, really smoothly, but there was that needed to be that decision and no doubt about actually actively choosing those timelines as well, right? Which is very, very interesting. So there's that aspect. And then playing with time in general is pretty cool as well. So I think once we start to expand and become more conscious, there's less material, physical material or denser material frequencies to work with. So time ends up being quite interesting in the sense where I've tried to make a meeting where I had to drive across town where I knew like I was going to be late, about 20 minutes late, and somehow managed to get there 3 minutes early. So we start experimenting with time quite radically when we start kind of like shifting our consciousness as well. And then it's once we get through that, it's now then trying to do it consciously is the other thing as well. Once we start moving through that. Stephanie and I are open to questions. Just drop any questions in the chat box as we go through this. Any curiosity, we're happy to answer anything that you put through with regards to anything with timelines as well. So what about the collapsing timelines? Do you want to Oh, the other thing is that we wanted to talk about is how everything is reflective. So everything that's happening in an external environment is a reflection of what's happening in an internal environment on a personal basis.
Yeah.
Okay. So Terry Lee says, what does it look like when you collapse timelines in the records? Do you want to take that?
Yeah. So for me, I just actively dissolve them and return them to source. That's it. It's literally untethering. It is those threads of energy is how I engage with them. And the thing is, there is a tangible effect in the reality after that's done, right? I had a client a couple of weeks ago and she just said, yeah, everything's perfect. Like it's like she was doing a lot of ancestral work and we didn't do a ton of work, but she's fully in the moment. Things are pretty peaceful right now. Like she's in a beautiful flow was how she described it. And it's like, okay, well, this is working, right? So.
I try and identify the timelines that aren't in resonance. So I tend to set that intention when I'm working in the records, and I ask them to bring forward the information. Or like Stephanie says, I also tend to see them as like tethers or tendrils. Like it's just very light, kind of like energy, kind of like, I don't know, it looks almost like a jellyfish or an octopus in the water that is very thin and clear, like that connects us to all things energetically. And so basically I ask for all the ones that aren't in alignment with the highest resonance to dissipate or dissolve or transmute. And what happens is, the way I envision it is that it's almost like the light disappears from them, and then it allows only the timelines. And remember, I link timelines to possible decisions and possible choices moving forward. And then all those that are in highest resonance, I tend to bring in the people, the places, and the opportunities to activate those timelines that are in the highest resonance, because we're constantly choosing. So for that moment, I tend to collapse the ones that aren't in alignment and bring in the ones that are in the highest resonance. I don't choose them. I just ask them for them to come in, because I am very limited in this form right now.
Yeah, we can't necessarily define each one. It's just, you know, for me, it's whatever we've spoken about or whatever we've identified in the session, Terry, and then we go from there and ask to dissolve from there.
Another question I have is, I'm starting to be in 2 timelines at the same time. I can do my 3D work at home and then flip into 4D plus worlds at the same time. I think COVID and working from home is enabling this. I absolutely agree. And it's super cool, and it helps me to observe more.
Yeah. So we inhabit all those dimensions at the same time. It's just where we bring our attention, right? And so that's why, as much as it seems overworked and we're so tired of hearing it, that whole piece about being present, aware, awake, mindfulness is really important, because it's where we bring our attention that we're going to create our experiences from. So if we're paying attention and being distracted by the chaos of the 3D world that's just spiraling out of control around us right now, that's where we're going to be creating from. But if we can bring our awareness elsewhere, and, you know, we've all been in the programs and we all have a lot of different tools, it's just actively, for me, remembering to create that time and space, ironically, to step away and just embody those larger aspects of myself, right? And so that I remember that I have infinite possibility.
Absolutely. And I agree with what Stephanie's saying, and the question as well, in the sense that we have to live in all these dimensions, and we do live in all these dimensions. It is exactly, where are we placing our attention to while we're in that? So, and sometimes we work the opposite, where we don't want to be in 3D because sometimes it's too painful if the body is going through a trauma. But when we're doing healing, with regards to the healing in the Akashic Records, we look at things from a multidimensional aspect as well, where we're looking in our mental, emotional, etheric, and our physical bodies as well. But also when we're doing our spiritual work, sometimes we need to be in this 3D world because we still need to pay bills, put a roof over our physical body, absolutely. But then living in kind of like seeing things from that aerial perspective with a multi-dimensional way. What I started doing as well is I started looking at where my thoughts are that are linear. So it's like, why is this linear? Why am I thinking, how can I look at this from a multi-dimensional perspective, from a deeper perspective, no matter what it is, whether it's kind of like traveling, or whether it's even the work that I do, how can I look at this from a space that is multidimensional? Where is the limitations that I'm placing on myself, which is a lot with timelines as well. So for another question, I said, for a brief moment last week, I was straddling 2 timelines, but I lost it. Actually, so that's very interesting, because that brings up, for both of those questions, the straddling 2 timelines. the Dolores Cannon's work of stepping into a parallel universe for a very, very short period of time as well. So that's quite interesting from that perspective as well, that both of you are bringing up. So straddling these two timelines is kind of like, yeah, it's interesting for that perspective. And it's also kind of like, sometimes you need to look at the other timeline to see what that direction is. I did do a little bit of parallel life work a few years ago, and that was so interesting because that I found as a really, really quick cheat to kind of like downloading kind of like things that I had already mastered in a parallel lifetime that I was needing help with. So for example, speaking, I got told you need to speak, you need to speak, you need to teach. And I was like, I don't want to stand in front of people. I can't. I actually used to kind of like get so nervous. I'd have to prepare, I'd have to write everything down. And then I somehow connected to a life of mine who was very, very corporate, giving presentations, the confidence, of giving those presentations, I managed to download that experience into this cellular form, which then helped me immensely to be able to just speak like I am speaking now. So it's quite interesting when we start looking at different parallel lives, parallel timelines as well. So that is quite interesting. And for me, it's also about keeping that vibrational frequency high enough that, or clear enough so that I can choose which timeline I am heading towards and seeing what choice leads me into which timeline as well. And that's why I find the Akashic Records so, so important.
Oops.
Shall we look at the next question?
Yep. So there's another question. What are we meant to learn when we realize we're experiencing parallel lives or timelines? For me, it reminds me that I have other spaces that I can garner information from, that I am not just limited to this one aspect of myself. So for me, it shows up a lot whenever I'm in ceremony, because that's when the gates are wide open and there's another aspect of me that carries a lot of wisdom and brings a lot of information forth that's very pertinent to the situation. So that's just one example.
Timelines can be very, very confusing when it comes to relationships and partnerships, I've started noticing. So one thing that I've with some of my clients, where there is a complete attraction for another person within this timeline or this lifetime, and sometimes we're picking up vibrational frequencies or different situations from another timeline, and where you are together in that timeline, whereas in this timeline this might not necessarily be possible, or the lessons are a little bit different. So sometimes there's a little bit confusion between timelines and between past lifetimes as well. So they're all parallel lives, really, if you look at them. So sometimes we end up picking up the vibrational frequency or straddling that other timeline in and out of that timeline, which can be a little bit confusing. So there's protocols within the Akashic Records that you can use that will help to clarify that or release some of the attachments where it's not possible in this timeline either. So that's very, very important. And then Christine said, I do Dolores Cannon's work with clients, and I'm finding this year people are jumping into multiple past lives and timelines, and we are able to clear them all. Yes, absolutely. A few years ago, it was very linear, and how fascinating. And that's absolutely true. And that's because as a collective, we're starting to become more conscious. We're starting to have that awareness that this is there. And absolutely, I agree, when we're clearing, whether it's QHHT or Akashic or whatever modality it is, I believe that there is a knock-on effect within those lifetimes as to what you're going through now, because at the end of the day, we're all one. We're all aspects of each other having these different experiences, and we're all mirroring each other to each other as well, which is interesting. Trisha says, are we able to manifest, access other higher timelines to help get through hard times in 3D, especially to help others like family? So there's two parts to that question that I would like to address, and I'm sure Stephanie would as well. So yes, we are able to manifest or access higher timelines to help us get through this one. So you could connect to a future aspect of you, a future timeline aspect of you that will help you give you suggestions of what to do, or actually, like I said, kind of like download certain aspects of you that you need in this very, very moment. Or you could also access the past timelines to access the gifts that you have from your lineage that is there that will help you as well. However, when it's to help other family members, the best way to do that is to work through it yourself. Because unless they're asking for healing, unless they're asking for help, it becomes a very, very slippery slope, and it becomes quite hard sometimes to help somebody that doesn't want to be helped as well. However, the ancestral clearing will tend to, I found it as a cheat to be able to shift the frequencies within the genetics and within the patterns that the family members are trying to overcome. What do you think?
Yeah, so it's just a reminder again, we're not just in 3D at the moment. We inhabit all dimensions, right? It makes up our reality. We are part of everything, and everything is a part of us. And while Natasha was talking, you know, what I was told was that we're wired to be multidimensional, right? So it's again just taking that time and that presence to bring ourselves in alignment with that. And are we doing that? Am I doing that? And that's what I have to always keep asking myself. And there's a lot of days the answer is no. And there's other days it's like, yeah, look at you go, you're rocking it. But yeah, so it's just being conscious of that. It is called a practice for a reason. It's we always need to be continually engaging, you know. So yeah, as Natasha says at the beginning of all the workshops, it's, you know, ground, center, and clear, ground, center, and clear. And it's how do we bring that into our everyday practice? And the other part around family is the best thing that we can do. And what I've seen in all the work that I've done in communities and workshops and stuff like that is that if I can shift for myself, then when I'm with my family, and even through those energetic tethers to family, there's entrainment. The moment I shift my energy, my frequency, then there's an effect in those around me. And then they get to choose, right? Because it's going to agitate something in them. It's going to literally, like, you know, just be like a little two-finger push to their energy, if you need it to see it visually. And then they get to choose how they respond. So and that's sometimes where they choose a very different route from what we would have wanted for them, but it is all about free will, and they get to keep choosing again and again.
Absolutely.
But we can only do it for ourselves.
Absolutely. And I also see that within friends. So when we join this journey, we become conscious of it, where people start kind of like exiting your life and others people start coming in. And it's because we're choosing those timelines. And we're magnets, really. We attract everything that we vibrate at. So for example, like as we shift and as we change, and this happens with family as well, that's why there's that constant, no, you need to stay where you are, because it keeps you within that same timeline, right? Whereas we shift and expand, and people start to move away because that magnetic pull isn't there anymore. And that's because we're shifting timelines. So they move off onto a timeline, we move off onto another timeline. It doesn't mean one is better than the other, or one is, you know, whatever it is. It's just different choices and choosing different experiences. And that's why we then start connecting with new people that are in resonance with that frequency, because it's all within that timeline for some reason that comes in. But it's all about vibrational frequency. And that's what if you want to completely change a timeline, You have to resonate at the frequency of that timeline. It's like the Akashic Records. If we want to access that information, we need to vibrate at the frequency of that information to be able to pull it as well. It's all connected, all connected. The same as like any disease, it's a frequency that is connected. It's a timeline that needs to be healed.
Yeah, and when we don't recognize people, that's why, right? It's because either we've changed so dramatically or they've changed. So, and you can't, it's not that you can't calibrate for them, but it's just there's not the resonance that there was, right? And we are creatures of habit. We seek out those fields where there is resonance. You know, it is I think it's we're habituated to do that. And I think it's about safety. So, yeah.
Any other questions? Trisha says, thank you so much. That helped so much. Okay, I'm glad. Okay. Is there any other questions? Just pop them into the box. We're here for a few more minutes and I hope this has been helpful. And interesting. Stephanie and I are also happy to debate any other topics as well. So absolutely, we're going to post this on YouTube and on Raising the Vibes page as well to help others. So if you have any kind of like anything you'd like us to cover, we're happy to cover anything spiritual as well. So thank you all so much for showing up, and I'll see you all soon.